Peace, Black family. So today's video will be in reference to culture. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is because recently on social media I came under attack. Excuse me, because I made a comment stating that Black culture, whether here in the Americas, the Caribbean, or the continent, has been impacted by slave and colonizers' culture. Now, a lot of people was upset by that. They were highly upset. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And I'm just going to kind of explain why I feel that our culture has been infiltrated by slave culture and colonist culture. So, first and foremost, let's deal with the fundamentals of what is a culture. Culture, for the most part, is made up of clothing, language, religion, and foods, right? And so everything else kind of falls in a subcategory. So I'm going to also throw in entertainment, sex, friendships, relationships, greetings, respect, style of fighting, jokes, and other things. So let's get into it. Okay, so first and foremost, in dealing with entertainment as a culture, music, television, and dance as a culture. Here in America, we know that the music base for Black people goes back to Negro spirituals. Negro spirituals go back to our ancestors picking cotton and singing as they pick cotton, being introduced to Christianity, taking Christianity on as our religion, and creating what is called Negro spirituals. Negro spirituals gave birth to what is called blues. Blues gave birth to what is called jazz. Jazz gave birth to other different art forms like R&B, which later on morphed into hip hop, which later on morphed into rap. So the cultural aspect of music here in America came from the plantation, from African slaves singing Negro spirituals. This is a fact. You can't go around it. This is a fact. Tap dancing, dancing in general here in America, coming from a cultural standpoint, our ancestors would tap dance for white people. This is why in the culture now we say, man, look at this Negro over here tap dancing for them crackers. Because that's a way to slander someone, to say you tap dancing Negro, because our ancestors would get out there, yes, master, yes, master. That's culture. So what are you dancing for? I understand before we were enslaved, before we were colonized, when we would dance, it would be a spiritual thing. But now what are you dancing for? You're dancing for the entertainment of whites. And a lot of people still are dancing for the entertainment of whites. This is a fact. This is a fact. This is why we love to get up there and do little African dances with white people. Cultural. Even in the continent, the same thing. Our people now are in Africa dancing for tourists. When tourists come around, they throwing dollars at their feet. They're dancing for them. We're in New Orleans dancing for them. From the continent to the Caribbean to Africa, what are you dancing for? Not the same reasons our ancestors were dancing, because they were dancing for spiritual reasons. Now you're dancing for entertainment. So please understand what I say when I say things that started off cultural were intertwined with the system of racism, white supremacy, and has that element of racism, white supremacy in it. Television. Television is a form of entertainment as well. When we turn on television, what do we see? Stereotypes of Black people. Disrespectful stereotypes of Black people. Okay? Going on to sex. Sex is being cultural, because we often don't think of sex being something that's cultural, and sex is very cultural. Because some people in certain cultures have sex for reproduction only. In this culture where people have been sexualized and have been taught to think of sex as a pastime, as a skill, as something they should be graded on, we're having sex for all the wrong reasons. In different cultures, sex was a purpose to it. Look at the Jewish families. When they have sex to reproduce a whole bunch of children. Most Asian cultures and African cultures that haven't been tampered with Same mentality. They have sex in line with the stars, aligned with the constellations. They have sex for purpose. We have sex for non-purpose because previously our purpose was to reproduce children for master on the breeding farms. So sex became nothing to us in our culture. And this goes from, again, the continent to the Caribbean to the States. Same thing. Sex has become nothing to us. A pastime. Over-sexualization. Like my young brother Rome has said. If you haven't watched this video, go check it out. So, first and foremost, before we even want to engage in sex, we have to sit back and realize and say, well, what are we having sex for? What is the purpose for this? To feel good? To escape whatever we're going through? We have to get back to purpose. So even sex is cultural. Women now like this whole S&M thing. Black women, they like to be chained up and whipped and spanked. Where does that come from? Have we ever sat back and thought and say, wait a minute, isn't this what the slave master did to our ancestors? When they would chain them up and whip them on the back and spank them? But we like that? You don't see that in African tribes. The women are not telling their tribe husband to tie them up and chain them and choke them and spit in their face. Where did you get that from? You got that from the culture in which you live. And now you think, I like that. No, you have been indoctrinated to like that. You have been indoctrinated to feel incitement when someone's spanking you on the back and choking you and disrespecting you and chaining you up because you come from a slave culture. And again, that's from the States, the Caribbean, to the continent. Maybe not in places that have not been colonized, but for the most part, if you came in contact with Europeans, that has been ingrained in your culture. Language. Let's deal with language and expressions and words. How does that fall into a cultural aspect? So, in saying things like, I'm going to my master bedroom, or the master bedroom is the biggest house in the room. That comes from a slave culture, because we all know on the plantation, the biggest room in the house would be the master's bedroom. Slave culture. The master bedroom is the biggest house on the plantation. And now we push that into our communities. And so we say it willingly. Oh yeah, I got the master bedroom. Not even knowing. Or we say things like, oh, my boss just called me. Your boss? You don't have a boss. You have a manager, supervisor, director. You don't have a boss. A boss is a slave master. So we have to understand how language also plays within culture. How expression also plays within culture. The things you say are culturally bound to who you are and how you express yourself. Right? In Haitian culture, you are not allowed to whistle around an adult. If you whistle around an adult, they will smack you in the mouth. You cannot souffle, which means whistle, around an adult. Why is that? Well, because the slave master wouldn't allow us to whistle during slavery. If you are around an adult and they pass gas, you, as the younger person, would have to say, excuse me, for that adult. This is Haitian culture. Well, why am I saying excuse me? Because if the slave master would pass gas, then you would have to say excuse me. A lot of these things are passed on and we never think to say, where the hell does that come from? Why the hell are we repeating that? Why can't you? And a lot of elders in the Haitian culture can't even tell you why it's disrespectful for you to whistle. They don't even know, but they want you to not do it. So we got to understand how language plays in alignment with slave culture. Expression. There's a scene in Amistad that I always talk about where, and if you're not familiar with Amistad, go check the movie out. I'm just going to give you a brief summary on it, where the Africans end up going to court and they end up winning their case. Long story short, the European lawyer comes back to them and says, hey, look, we have to try the case again. So the translator tells the African gentleman, he says, we have to try the case again. So the African man says to him, but you said if we win this case, this is what he says to the European. He said, if we win this case, we will be able to go free. And so the European lawyer says to him, well, that's what I meant, but that's not what I should have said. And so the translator says, I cannot translate should. And he says, what do you mean you can't translate should? He says, in Mende culture, in African culture, we don't have the word should. Either you do something or you don't. Language has a lot to do with expression. In European culture, it's all about shoulda, coulda, woulda, maybe, may have, because their culture is all about tricking and manipulating and leading you on. The civil rights should have made you equal. We could have ended slavery earlier. We were going to give you back your land, the Native Americans. You get what I'm saying? Their culture is all about manipulation. In African culture, is either you do something or you don't. That was in the movie Amistad. Very impactful. Because if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss what he said. We don't have the word should in Mende language. Either you do something or you don't. And this is why expressions and sayings go hand in hand with culture as well, because the European culture is all about manipulating. It's all about lying. It's all about sleight of hand. Now going on to foods. As we know here in the Americas and in the Caribbeans and some parts of Africa, our foods come from colonialism or slavery for the most part. I'm not saying all. I'm saying for the most part. Because if you look at here in the Americas, in some families, they still eat chitlins. They still eat pig feet. They still eat hog maws. And we know historically that comes from the slave master not wanting to eat the pig feet or not wanting to eat the chitlins. And if you don't know what chitlins are a pig's rectum, a pig's booty lining. Okay? And so historically speaking, that what was given to our ancestors. And they turned that into cuisine. Okay? In the Caribbean, a lot of us eat pork. In Haitian culture in particular, we eat what is griot. That's fried pork. Griot is fried pork. So in Africa, we weren't eating no damn fried pork. We weren't eating no damn chitlins. We were not in Africa ordering, hey, y'all want some pig booty? And then I'll take some fried pork. That's not what we were doing. That comes from the slave culture, the colonizers' culture. Okay? And even I'm going to shoot back to language. If you go to most African countries now, to this day, they're either going to speak French, Portuguese, or some European language. Now, most of them still speak their native tongue, but a lot of them take pride in speaking European. I've met Africans who was like, oh, you're Haitian. I was like, yeah. And then they start speaking French with me. Where they take more pride in speaking their oppressor's language than their own native tongue. And I'm not saying all, because you have some solid brothers on the continent. You have some solid sisters on the continent. What I'm saying is culture, language, how we come adaptive. Even in Haitian culture, they say if you don't speak French, then you're not educated. Really? This is instead of taking pride in their Creole, the language they created, that came from French. Okay, yeah, it came from French and some African dialect. We don't ever want to forget that in Creole there's French and there's African dialect. But they take more pride in speaking French. So moving on. Dress code. Well, we already know dress code. We don't really wear our African garments as much as we're supposed to. But just to put in something in dress code, as far as hairstyles, and this kind of goes towards the women for the most part, because our women don't necessarily wear their natural hair the most. So with that being said, we're just going to skip over that. Not even going to go hard press on that. Religion, I'm sure by now we all know that we're practicing foreign religions. That is not our religion. Romance. Romance is also culturally as well. Romance has a lot to do with culture, how we express our romance to one another. In European culture, it's all about what type of gifts you can give me. How can you spoil me to show me that you love me? That's European culture. In some cultures, Asian, Africa, they don't give gifts. But in European culture is what can you give me to show me you love me? So even our romance has been culturally structured and put together. Style of fighting. I noticed that in most South American places, African people have a style of fighting that's martial arts. Because you got places like Brazil where they practice capoeira, right? Which comes directly from Africa. Here in the Americas, it's boxing. So even our style of fighting has been shaped by our colonization, by our enslavement.